A glossy door slammed against Clara's shoulder and two hands forced her into the back seat before she had time to shut the satchel tight. Fear tightened her throat. She pressed both palms against the damp stack of envelopes and tried to pull them back, but a heavy glove closed over the papers and wrenched them free. "Where did you get these?" A voice asked close to her ear, low and deliberate. Clara's breath hitched. The alley bricks were still cold under her shoes when the black car had appeared. Now the car's warm leather smelled like engine oil and a faint trace of tobacco. Clara kept her fingers curled around the empty leather strap where the letters had been and let fear make her clear. Fear pushed her words forward in a clipped rush. "They were my aunt's. I inherited them." Clara then swallowed and reached for the satchel as if to prove the truth. The driver, a thin man who introduced himself only as Marco by the nod of his jaw, watched without changing expression. The other man in the front leaned back, and the light from the street lamp across the alley cut his profile into a silhouette and then a face. Adrian Moretti. Suspicion threaded through Clara as she looked at Adrian. The word formed in her mind before she could shape it into a full question. She had found the letters in the attic of the row house she now rented, bound with twine and smelling of lavender and dust. Now a stranger's eyes fixed on the handwriting, and those eyes narrowed with recognition. Clara Hayes, Adrian, stating her name as if checking it off. "How did you come by Evelyn Ross's letters?" Clara's pulse beat against the silence. Her response came in fragments. "They were with the house papers. My aunt left them to me in her will." She kept her sentences short and concrete, because fear made her hands clumsy and she needed to sound credible. She felt Adrian's gaze on the small scar over her left eyebrow as if he catalogued the mark and then moved on. He did not smile. He reached for the envelope and turned it so the handwriting faced him. His thumb brushed the edge. A small motion, but it changed the room. Marco's fingers tightened on the wheel. Cloth whispered as someone shifted. The car moved off the cobbles and into the quiet city streets. Clara watched the rear window and counted streetlights with a method that felt useless and necessary at once. Her mind landed on Evelyn Ross's name, printed on the top letter in a hand that had loops and deliberate slants. She had read one letter at home that evening, more out of curiosity than purpose, and the sentences had sounded like someone writing to shape a life for another person. Inside the car's amber light, Adrian opened another letter and read a few lines with his head tilted. His face did not change until he found a passage that made him close the paper carefully and look up at Clara. The change in his expression moved her from suspicion to a narrower, sharper fear. This was not a mistake, and the letters were not harmless. "This name's someone. Adrian, this name's a boy I knew." He tapped the page with a forefinger. Clara felt the tap like a small verdict. Evelyn Ross wrote to him. Adrian continued. "There is a promise here." Clara's voice had a shape of its own now. She wrote to a young man she mentored. She wanted him to have something she could not give openly. They never married. "I found the bundle in a trunk labeled E. Ross. That is all I know." Her words were plain facts. Trunk, label, found. She repeated the chain of events because plain facts were shelter. Adrian's eyes moved, not with suspicion alone, but with a calculation Clara could not read yet. The driver, Marco, who had introduced himself with a cold nod, added, "We were told to retrieve them." "Who left them to you?" "Clara." His voice held the practical tone of a man who expected answers to be short and exact. Clara named her aunt, Lydia Hayes, and said the month of the will probate. Each small detail settled like a stone in the car's hush. Adrian listened and then said, "We will check the papers. Do you understand the risk?" Clara felt the words land on her skin like a cool hand. "I don't know what risk," she said. She tried to make her question steady, though her voice trembled. She had not wanted any part of Evelyn's life beyond curiosity about the handwriting and the pressed flower between pages. She had not expected the night, or a mafia boss in a tailored overcoat, nor a private garage as the destination. They arrived at a gated garage that smelled of oil and concrete. The door shut with a mechanical thud behind them, and the world outside severed into muffled distance. Clara's knees wanted to tremble. She took them a step at a time. Marco guided her into a vestibule lit by a single amber lamp where a man called Marco, again, this time a lieutenant, moved with disciplined speed to take the letters for inspection. The lieutenant's hands were methodical and quick. "Don't move," he said to Clara, not unkindly but without patience. The lieutenant spread the envelopes on a steel table and flattened them with gloved palms. Clara watched the letters splay under light and felt both naked and protected by the same thing, a knowledge she did not own. Adrian stood by the table and let his hand rest on the back of a chair. He spoke quietly to the lieutenant, and Clara heard names she did not know. Dates, a place name, a reference to a promise made in 1998. The detail pulled her from personal fear into a sharp curiosity. She moved closer and touched the edge of a page. For a moment Adrian did not stop her. He watched her with a kind of attention that made her aware of how she leaned over the table, how the lamp fell across her cheek and the brass locket at her throat. When she opened a letter at the far side of the bundle, the paper cradled itself and the handwriting inside had a slope Clara recognized from the envelope. Evelyn's sentences were direct, addressed to a young man named Matteo, with small instructions and a line that read, "If I cannot say it, let these pages shape your path." Clara read aloud because the words moved through her fingers like a tangible thing. "If I cannot say it, let these pages shape your path." She looked up and found Adrian watching her. His hand rested on the chair's back, but his thumb touched the signet ring he always wore. The sound of the ring against his skin was almost a small metronome in the room. Adrian's voice was low when he said, "Evelyn called him Matteo." At that name, Clara felt a shift. Suspicion folded into a heavy interest. "Matteo." She asked, "Do you know him?" Clara, because she needed to place herself in the conversation and keep others from pushing her away. Adrian did not answer fully. Instead, he leaned forward and asked one question that pulled the thread tighter. Why did Evelyn write to him about a promise? Clara could not explain the promise because she had not read the entire set of letters. She had not meant to. The words on the page resembled a map of private instructions and a warning that someone had been asked to protect a secret. Adrian's jaw tightened. A tension ran across his face that had nothing to do with the lamp and everything to do with his memory, that promised ties to people who are still alive. He said, "There are consequences outside." The garage door shuddered with an impact, and the sound traveled through concrete like a percussion beat. Clara's body reacted before her mind registered that reaction. She froze and then moved toward Adrian. A disguised Sedan had come too close and hit the gate with deliberate force. Marco's hand went to the radio. The lieutenant frowned and called orders across the space. Gunfire followed the impact like an echo answering a shouted name. The first rounds thudded against metal and the garage light shivered. Adrian dropped onto Clara's side without hesitation and put his body between her and the door. His hands were quick and practiced as he pulled her down behind a concrete pillar. He did not shout. He gave one clear order to Marco, whose face set into a shape of concentration: "Cover the entrance." Now Marco nodded and moved. Clara felt the heat of the bullets where the metal had been struck and tasted dust and oil. Her breathing came fast and shallow. Her fingers found the corner of Evelyn's letter and clutched it with a grip that left the paper creased. She wanted to ask what they were fighting for, who wanted the letters, and why anyone would fire into a private garage. Adrian pressed himself close enough that she felt the ridge of his coat against her cheek. "Stay down, Clara," he said. There was a steadiness to his voice that contained an instruction she could follow. The attack was brief and contained, but violent. Masked figures tried to force the gate, and a tracked car stalled at the curb to keep the retreat path open for the attackers. Marco and the lieutenant moved with a practiced choreography. One man drew and fired into the gap while another used a service door for cover. Adrian barked orders in curt sentences: 3, 4, 1, stop, flank, and the men obeyed with rapid movements that sounded like precise machine work. Clara counted the commands because counting kept her from letting her body go past the edge of shock. One of the attackers managed to throw a grenade that detonated against a locked service door. and glass sprayed into the vestibule where Clara had been standing moments before. The force of the sound pushed at her eardrums. She pressed her palms into the floor until the pain erased other sensations. Someone's boot tapped near her shoulder. A man's hand, Adrian's, touched her elbow to lift her and move her to a safer corner. The sound of a rifle slide and the metallic click of magazine changes filled the space between breaths. When the firing slowed and the attackers withdrew, the garage fell into a ragged quiet. Footsteps counted the aftermath as men checked angles and sealed doors. Marco came back with a small first aid kit and set it on a case beside Clara. Adrian sat opposite her and removed a cloth, damp with cold water, to press against the graze near her temple where glass had nicked her skin. He used a motion that was precise and careful rather than sentimental. He wiped the cut and then applied pressure in a way that kept the blood from spilling. Clara's voice returned in small pieces. Who were they? She demanded, not just with fear now, but with a hardening curiosity that had started in the car and tightened under fire. Why did they want the letters? Her hands trembled, but her questions were direct. Adrian met each one with a measured reply. They were hired to get the bundle. We don't know who hired them yet. They were paid to be thorough. His sentences were short, controlled, and his eyes avoided naming the group. That would have been a louder answer. The lieutenant brought a small bundle of photographs and set them on the table. One photo was of Evelyn Ross in a dress from another time. Another was a young man, Matteo, leaning against a wall with his hands in his pockets. Clara touched the photo of Matteo and found a crease left by time. He looks like he could be in his 30s, she said. Adrian nodded. He is about that age. He is part of what Evelyn tried to keep safe. Clara realized the letters were not private mementos, but a document that could guide someone's life. The knowledge sharpened her resolve. Fear changed into a cautious energy that organized her thoughts. She Adrian the exact chain of custody, Lydia Hayes' probate folder, the attic trunk, the brass locket she had not yet opened. Her sentences were short and factual. Each fact made it harder for Adrian to dismiss her as accidental or dangerous. Adrian studied her hands as she spoke, watching how they rubbed the edge of a page when she thought. He lifted a letter and smoothed it with 2 fingers as if testing its age. Evelyn taught him certain things, Adrian. She gave him instructions that mattered to people who would prefer their past remain buried. He did not elaborate, and the selective silence suggested there was more Adrian knew and would not yet say. Clara felt a new pull, curiosity that edged toward responsibility. If Evelyn had written with the intent of shaping Matteo's choices, then the letters were a tool and a target. If the letters show someone where to go or who to trust, then they are dangerous in the wrong hands. Clara. Her voice carried determination now. Action rose from fear into a purpose that guided what she would do next. She straightened on the settee and set the bundle carefully on her lap like an anchor. Adrian watched her arrange the papers. He lifted his chin and made a proposition with minimal elaboration. He could keep the letters safe, he said, where they would not be trafficked again. He named a place, his house's secure safe, where the pages could be sealed. Give them to me for safekeeping, Clara, he said. His tone was even. The weight of the offer filled the room without theatrics. Clara felt an internal shift then. From fear to suspicion and then to an odd, reluctant trust born from the night's violence and from Adrian's precise care in tending her wound. She looked at the paper edges, at the pressed flower Evelyn had left between pages, and at the photograph of Matteo. The choice was concrete and immediate. Hand over the letters and accept protection under a man with dangerous ties, or refuse and risk the people who had come back. She him a simple question. If I give them to you, will you promise none of the pages will leave your control? Her voice did not waver. Adrian's hand moved slowly to the signet ring and his thumb rested there. The motion was habitual. It was how he decided. I will not let them go to anyone who would use them to harm the people named, he said. He did not promise openness or full disclosure. He promised containment. Outside, before dawn blued the windows, someone at a distance sounded a horn as if testing the city for response. The garage hummed with security systems and the smell of coffee a man had left by the radio. Adrian slid a leather envelope across the table toward Clara. It was heavy, with a flap that locked quietly. "Place the letters inside," he said. His voice had a small steadiness now that felt almost like a hand offered, exact and necessary. Clara hesitated only a heartbeat. She slid the bundle into the leather case and pressed the flap down. Her fingers left an oil mark on the leather. She felt the letters inside like a weight that had moved from the attic to a new custody. She looked up at Adrian and waited for the follow-through of the deal. Adrian closed the envelope and then, unexpectedly, offered her tea and a chair near the window as the first pale light entered. He did not ask for her trust. He asked for the letters. Clara held the leather parcel and realized the chapter of her night had reached a decision point she could not postpone. She rose and followed him toward the small breakfast room where the pale dawn would test the amber lamp's claim. The last sound in the garage before they stepped through the door was the click of a bolt being engaged, and the quiet breath of men resuming watch. The decision now sat in Clara's hands, to keep the letters and stay exposed, or to allow a dangerous protector to hold them and keep her alive. A gloved hand shoved Clara into the study and the door slammed. Fear tightened her throat and her fingers went numb around the satchel strap. Marco's boot struck the polished floor as he planted himself at the threshold, and Adrian stood backlit by the fireplace, watching the stack of envelopes on the rug. Clara pressed both palms to the damp paper and lunged for a single fallen envelope, as if that small motion could undo the force that had thrown her across the hallway earlier that night. She could still hear the memory of a glossy car door slamming and two hands forcing her into a back seat. That image sat behind her eyes and made her jaw work. Fear was not an idea. It pulled her knees inward, made her breath quick, and made her hands insist on action. She pulled the envelope to her chest with a single sharp motion and said, "Please, those are mine." Adrian's voice answered without moving his jaw much. "They are not yours to take from me." Clara's reply was a small, raw sound. "They were in my satchel. They came with my apartment keys and an address." Lucia stepped forward from the shadow near the bookcases, lamplight catching the edge of her glasses. "Let me see the handwriting," she said. Her tone was neutral, the way a person asks for an object, not a confession. A courier had shoved the stack into Clara's life earlier that week. The apartment key had matched the envelope bundle. Clara had been 3 hours from home when the car had pulled up, and the wrong hand had closed on her satchel. That sequence of mistakes, wrong street, wrong woman, wrong time, had pushed her across the threshold into Adrian's house and now into the family's private study. The concrete danger was visible. Men in the hall, a hand on a ring that never left its finger, the letters on the rug. The stakes were clear. These papers were now evidence, not heirlooms, and everyone in the room understood the cost of leaving them loose. Clara folded her fingers over the envelope and realized she was trembling. She rubbed a thumb along the edge of the paper, a small motion she used when she needed to steady herself. "I don't know whose they are," she said. "I only know they were addressed to Evelyn Ross." They smelled like old ink. Adrian pinched the bridge of his nose and the faint vertical scar along his jaw tightened with the movement. "Evelyn Ross," he repeated. The name changed him. His shoulders shifted as if he put on a weight he had carried before. Marco's eyes flicked to Adrian and back to Clara. The room filled with short, efficient silences that meant decisions were being made. Lucia knelt and smoothed the fallen envelope on the rug. She lifted it, turned it, and checked the ink and fold. "Date stamp is consistent with the others," she said. "This is the same hand." Clara felt suspicion crawl through her ribs. Suspicion that someone had planned this to bring those letters into Adrian's house. Suspicion that the bundle had not been abandoned by accident. She met Adrian's eyes and saw a coolness that had been edged with loss. "Why would you care about old letters?" she asked him. Adrian stepped closer with measured speed. "Because what Evelyn wrote can change who people were willing to protect." He folded his hands behind his back. "We will authenticate." The forensic step was quick. Lucia produced gloves from her coat pocket, handled the stack with slow, certain gestures, and opened a few envelopes. She read aloud a line into the quiet room. Clara listened to the cadence of Evelyn's writing, not as a stranger but as a visitor into someone else's private life. When Clara heard a sentence that named a person Adrian had protected once, her mouth went dry. She wrote about a man who never knew the risk she took to save him. Lucia eyes on Adrian for a heartbeat. She names him by initials and gives a date. Adrian's jaw stiffened. Marco sealed the entrances. No one leaves. The command sent Marco out to the hall. Clara watched the way Adrian's thumb rested on his worn signet ring. The motion was small, but Clara had seen it before in photographs that hung on the study wall, the way he habitually steadied himself before decisions. The letters were not mere sentiment. Lucia's verification changed them into proof. That shift tightened the room. An hour earlier, on the street, Clara had tried to close the satchel as rain dampened the envelopes. Now the rain-as smell clung to the paper and to her sleeve. She had not meant to read the letters, but when an envelope split under Lucia's careful hands and a single line about a hidden ledger slipped into view, Clara's curiosity pushed her eyes across the ink. Her throat tightened, and she read 2 sentences aloud before she could stop herself. If anyone asks, say I left for the coast. Burn everything if they come for the ledger. The line landed like a small explosion. Adrian's expression changed so quickly Clara felt a physical stutter in the room. The controlled face replaced by a flash of something older, blame, gratitude, a memory that smelled of smoke. He took the paper from Lucia's hand and read it with a speed that kept his face composed but his fingers white at the knuckles. The ledger, he said. Where is this ledger now? Clara swallowed. Fear shifted into a harsher-edged dread. She felt the room tilt toward urgency. I don't know. I only found the letters. Lucia stood and walked to the desk, where a slim lamp threw an amber pool across certificates and a ledger that was not the one mentioned. She tapped a pen on the blotter in thought. If Evelyn hid something valuable, someone else might have found a copy. They had external confirmation soon after. A courier burst through the study door, breathless, holding a damp envelope with torn edges. A damaged copy showed up at a safe house on Palermo Street, he panted. They sent it through a runner. It mentioned Evelyn. The news raised the tension. Adrian went cold with decision, making motion bring it here. Now, Marco pushed him out of the way toward the stairwell. Lucia extended her hand for the damaged paper and turned it over by the desk lamp. Clara watched Adrian's mouth while he listened to the courier. He barked 2 words that cut the air. Move positions. He walked to the window and drew the curtain with a precise, slow pull, as if hiding the room from the city's first light might matter. His measured gestures disguised a mind already listing possibilities. Clara felt a change. Suspicion had become fear. Fear had become something like resolve. That resolve shifted again when loud banging sounded at the service door. The noise was coarse. Someone shoved their shoulder against wood. Marco's head snapped toward the corridor. They've forced the service door. The courier said, "Foot soldiers." Adrian's voice narrowed. "Secure the perimeter. Take positions." Lucia, find which letters mention the ledger names. Clara, stay here. Clara went to hide the most incriminating envelopes as the men moved fast. Her hands found a false compartment in a lower drawer, an old concealment Adrian's house kept for documents. She slipped the bulkiest stack inside and clicked the false bottom shut. An intruder's shout came from the stairwell and metal clanged, boots on the steps. Someone lunged into the doorway. Clara's hand was caught by an intruder as she pushed another envelope into the false compartment. His grip was rough and his face was shadowed. She had no time to think beyond a single decision. She pulled a document from the satchel and read aloud the name at the top. "Giovanni Pellegrino," she said, voice steady with an odd, immediate clarity. The man froze. He repeated the name like a test. "Giovanni Pellegrino," he asked, then lowered his hand a fraction. "Who's that?" Adrian stepped forward fast enough that Clara felt the air change. He was a partner. He owes more than words. Adrian's voice was flat and spoke like a fact. The intruder leader's eyes darted toward Marco in the doorway as if reading the room for danger levels. The pause lasted 3 intense seconds. Outside, more boots shuffled. The leader shouted an order, and then lost his nerve when Marco and two other lieutenants moved into the corridor, guns not raised but visible. They stood like a door that would not open. The intruder leader's shoulders lowered, and, without a word, he backed away. That hesitation was the chapter's small cliffhanger. It changed the immediate trajectory. The attackers left with a commotion of curses and a slammed service door. The study door was closed and bolted again. Clara let out the breath she had been holding and felt an odd, new weight. She had used Evelyn's words as a weapon, and it had worked. The room's atmosphere shifted from violent risk to a brittle, fragile truce. Adrian lowered himself into a chair, and for the first time in the night he took off his gloves. The movement surprised Clara. She had seen him wear those gloves in photographs and during meetings, a barrier between his hands and decisions. He set them on the desk with careful fingers and looked at Clara in a way that asked a question he did not speak aloud. "Why did you read that line?" "Lucia." Her voice was quiet, not accusatory but searching. "You could have burned it." Clara found her voice. "I didn't mean to read it. It slid open and I saw his name. It felt necessary." Adrian's hand went to the signet ring at his thumb. He pushed it and looked at Lucia, a name that forced them to pause. "That saved us an immediate fight." Marco crossed his arms and nodded once. "She did." The confirmation shifted the room's attitude toward Clara. No one offered thanks, but the fact mattered. Adrian walked to the bookcase and paused before an old photograph of Evelyn. He touched the frame with the gentlest motion, then turned back to the desk. They sat and assessed. Lucia catalogued letters that named people, dates, and locations. Adrian grouped envelopes into piles by urgency. Marco checked locks and windows. Clara read aloud when Lucia heard to, and the act of reading made the letters into evidence more than sentiment. She found names, small directives, hints about transfers, and a reference to a ledger hidden with a flower pressed between the pages. At one point Lucia looked up sharply. "There is a note here that suggests Evelyn feared someone within our circle knew too much. She mentions a safe deposit box number and a bank branch across the river." Adrian's jaw worked. "We will trace it. Marco, you and Toro take the safe deposit branches at first light. Move discreetly." Clara felt her earlier fear transform into a different motion. Curiosity sharpened into purpose. She had come to these letters to understand someone else's life, and had instead become a part of a living puzzle that tugged at the city-sold debts and alliances. Her hands stopped trembling when she had work to do. Reading, sorting, naming, action steadied her. A short while later the courier returned with a list of names found in the damaged copy. He handed it to Adrian, who scanned the paper like a man finding a map to an old wound. "Giovanni Pellegrino is connected to the ledger."
"Yes."
"But there's also a name here. Fabrizio Moretti." Adrian's look did not change, but Clara heard something in it she had not heard before, recognition and an H. "Fabrizio," he said. The name was private and heavy. He was supposed to be gone. Clara's chest tightened. She had read Evelyn's lines, and now Alina's life was unfurling into the present. A twist had arrived. One of the names in the letters tied directly to Adrian's family history. That relation changed how Clara understood the letters, and how Adrian understood them. It was no longer merely an archive of a stranger. It was a ledger that could redraw loyalties and expose old favors. Lucia closed the folder she had been using and rested her palm on its cover. "We can tea-leave these loose. The damaged copy shows someone already tried to extract information. Whoever holds the ledger can use it." Adrian looked at Clara. "Stay. Read with me. Help me decide which envelopes we move and which we destroy." Clara hesitated once, then nodded. The morning light at the window had gone from blue to pale amber. She sat at the desk with the remaining letters in a tight stack and opened the first sealed envelope with care. Her breath was a soft, even rhythm now. Her fear had settled into a steady attention. She read aloud and Adrian listened, thumb on his ring, eyes closed for a sliver of time before he understood what each sentence meant. Outside, the city sounded ordinary, a distant car horn, the soft scrape of early traffic, but inside the study, names and dates moved like coffins being opened. Each revelation changed the shape of alliances, moved suspicion from one person to another, and forced choices on people who had once acted without thought. When Clara finished the set they had decided to keep that morning, she stacked the remaining envelopes and placed them on the desk. Her hands no longer shook. Lucia sealed the false drawer and pushed it closed. Marco checked the locks one last time and returned to the doorway. Adrian stood and walked to the window. He watched the street below with a patient, unreadable look. Then he turned and spoke to Clara in a voice that was low and measured. "You kept reading. You named one of the people who stopped the intruders. You have a steady hand with paper. I need someone who reads the truth without flinching." Clara's reply was small. "I don't want to be in the middle of this. I only wanted to find out who Evelyn was." Adrian's face softened by a fraction. Evelyn was dangerous with kindness. She saved a man and hid what she had to. That cost her. Clara put the brass locket on the desk and opened it once with a thumb. Inside, the photograph was small and plain. It had belonged to her grandmother. The gesture was private, but Adrian noticed. "You keep small anchors with you," he observed. "They remind me it's not only other people's stories I am reading. Clara, it reminds me I'm still here." Adrian inclined his head. Marco moved to his side and Lucia gathered the authenticated stack into a sealed envelope. They placed the packet in a safe at the rear of the desk. The action felt definitive. As morning light warmed the study, a car horn sounded twice outside, close enough to be a deliberate signal. Adrian's posture tightened the smallest amount. He turned toward the door and reached for his overcoat. Marco tensed and moved to stand by him. Lucia held the sealed packet and met Clara's eyes. Clara slid her hands into her lap. She had chosen in the early hours to sit and keep reading. Adrian had offered temporary sanctuary and a task, to read, name, and sought truth from protection. The room held that decision like a wound and a salve at once. Adrian put on his coat, buttoned the top fast, and looked down at Clara. "Stay. Guard the letters. Read the next set aloud when I return." Clara nodded. Lucia left the lamp on the desk and stepped toward the door with Marco. Adrian's hand brushed the desk, then closed the study door behind him. The final sound in the room was the click of the lock and the measured tread of steps on the landing. Clara sat alone with the remaining letters, the smell of old ink in the air, and a guarded watch that would not lift. Outside the study door, something moved, an arrival or another messenger. The noise came as a single knock and then silence. Clara leaned forward and pressed both palms to the desk as if to feel the pulse of the house. The knock repeated, distinct. She slid a finger into the envelopes and read the top line before she heard the first word through the wood. "Ms. Hayes," she answered. "Steady now, I am here." The knock paused, and then a voice she did not yet know said, "We need to speak with Moretti." Clara put the envelope down and rose. That was the immediate event that ended the chapter. Someone at the door demanding Adrian. She moved toward the door, the letters heavy in her palm, and the morning light slicing the study in a narrow band. The decision to stay and continue reading was no longer merely hers. The house had already begun to move again. A voice cut through the river wind. "Drop it." A man stepped up behind Clara, palm flat against the tied bundle, and the strap of her satchel slipped free. Fear crowded her throat. She swallowed and tightened her fingers on the twine as another figure called from below. Fear drove her first movement. Her hand went to the knot, fingers fumbling for purchase. That fear pushed her to act before she could think. She pulled a single envelope free and ripped it open to buy a second. The rooftop was narrow. Clara's shoes scraped concrete as she pivoted away from the low wall and toward the service door. She kept her chin down, watching hands, watching boots, listening for the motor beneath the alley. The last time a door slammed against her shoulder and two hands shoved her into a back seat, she had not been able to hold anything safe. The glossy car door had cut the night and left the satchel open on the wet pavement. She refused that loss again. The memory of a lock of hair caught in the car's hinge and the stack of envelopes torn from her palms sat like a lever inside her. She would not be taken unmoored a second time. A courier's helmeted silhouette leaned over the rooftop edge and spoke with a voice cramped by a radio. "The bundle." Hand it up and nobody gets hurt. Marco moved like a shadow at her shoulder, his boot set on the rooftop lip. Clara heard the motorcycle idling below, the high, beat thrum pressed against the floor. She smelled exhaust and paper and the river's damp. The stakes were obvious. These letters could become evidence, currency, or weapon. That clarity pushed her into the next decision. She forced the envelope she had torn toward the open mouth of the man who had grabbed her. "Read it," she said, voice thin. "Read it now." Her words were small, but the action changed the room. Every man there altered his line of sight. Fear shifted under her ribs into something harder, defiance. Clara's fingers tightened around the remaining twine. She kept breathing sharply, counting the faint pulse at the base of her thumb, and she felt the direction of the night tilt toward a single problem: the names in these pages. Adrianer's boots sounded on the metal stair before he cleared the parapet. He did not shout. He did not come with bluster. He crossed the rooftop, coat flaring a hairline of darkness, and put himself between Clara and the rooftop's edge. Marco's hand retreated to the side of his body. Adrian's presence calmed, but did not erase the immediate risk. Clara watched Adrian and the courier with the same attention. She gave a turned page. She had learned, from Evelyn's folded script, how people hid truth between polite lines. Now she felt the thrumming, practical pressure of truth in her palms. She had once promised herself she would only read what she could return unchanged. Evelyn's handwriting had felt like a stranger's kindness the first night Clara opened the satchel in her kitchen. The letters had authority. They were written to shape a man's choices and protect a private fact. Clara had promised she would be a steward, not a judge. But the man leaning over the parapet below called out a name that changed what stewardship meant in practice. Clara read aloud the first line she had torn. "If I cannot say this out loud, I will write it." Paolo Mancini took what was not his to hold and sold it to those who would break him. Her voice did not shake when she spoke Paolo's full name. Saying it made it real. The courier paused, and the man under the helmet cursed softly. Marco's eyes moved under his glove. Adrian's jaw tightened, but his face did not betray the shock. The revelation reallocated danger. Betrayal was not a rumor here. It had a name and a beneficiary and a claim that would make people choose sides. Clara's fear rippled into doubt. She had read Evelyn's sentences because the handwriting seemed urgent, not because she expected to find a live wound. She had imagined Evelyn's letters as echoes from someone dead. The handwriting said otherwise. A living man could still be ruined. That doubt made her mouth water and her fingers go cold. She did not know Paolo Mancini. The name meant nothing to her life until it appeared across Evelyn's careful slope. Doubt forced a new move. She shoved the torn paper back into the envelope and looked directly at Adrian. "Adrian," she said, "who is Paolo Mancini?" Adrian's voice came low. "Someone I trusted," he it cleanly. Clara heard the syllables and matched them to the image of Adrian in the study, watching the pile of envelopes by the fireplace. She remembered the night when the study door had slammed and Marco planted himself at the threshold, boots bright on the polished wood. That memory had been a corner of a worse evening. Now it looked like a hinge on the present. Adrian's trust had limits, and now those limits were being tested against the claim written in Evelyn's hand. The courier below barked a new demand. "You have 2 minutes. Toss it, or you answer for it in my boss's office." The voice carried threat, flat and practiced. Marco answered with a slow step forward. The rooftop narrowed into a scale, reputation versus safety, the letters versus flesh. Clara felt the weight of the twine in her palm like a fulcrum. Marco's mouth was a slit. "Those letters are leverage," he said. He straightened, spoke to the courier as if reciting a lesson. "They name a betrayal. Whoever holds them can pull a lot of people in or keep them quiet." Marco's accusation landed with the ease of a closing door. Everything that had been a rumor in the city became a tool in hands that wanted to move men like chess pieces. This raised the stakes for Clara in a concrete way. The letters did not belong to her by right, but she had them. Whoever held the originals could destroy or save a life. She understood, in a practical way, that the bundle could topple careers. The bundle could ruin sleep. A hand reached for it, and the hand would not be a gentle one. That plain logic, there is harm in this paper if it leaves soft hands, decided the next moment. Clara refused to hand the twine to the helmeted man. Instead, she moved in a single motion, stepping back toward Adrian and offering the bundle into his chest, rather than to the rooftop's edge. Adrian, take them, she said. Keep them safe. Dante let him have them. She set the bundle against Adrian's coat with care, the pressed corner of Evelyn's folded flower catching on his lapel. Adrian did not take them immediately. He looked at Clara for a long, measured second, thumb resting on his signet ring. His fingers closed over the twine as if testing leather. Clara, he said, quiet and direct, why did you read that line? She met his eyes, because someone was going to use them tonight. Her answer was not a confession of curiosity. It was a report. Clara had read to know what she was protecting and from whom. Adrian's jaw moved. He turned away from the parapet and gave a single order. Marco, lower the edge. Keep them away from the motorcycle. Now, Marco grunted and shifted. Two men moved to rear positions. The courier below sounded a horn through his radio. The roof hummed with tension, but also with a sudden, strict choreography. Adrian had rearranged the room by claiming authority over the object Clara held. They were alone then in the small alcove by the service door, the city lights slicing across Adrian's coat. The night pressed a different way. Not into metaphor, but into very real pressure. Someone could climb the stairs, someone could throw a rope, someone could shoot a tire and make the courier desperate. Clara felt each possibility as a sequence of concrete actions. She took a breath and asked the question she had been afraid to form aloud. Who is Polo to you? She said. Adrian inhaled, and when he spoke he stripped the layers away. Polo was a lieutenant. He made choices that put my people in danger, and I gave him a second chance because Evelyn wrote me a letter. I believed what she wrote about him. The admission landed like a tool placed on a bench. He did not ask for forgiveness. He provided a fact. If Evelyn accused Polo of selling information, I need to know whether she meant it the way she wrote it, or whether she meant something else. Clara thought of Evelyn's tone in the letters, wry, earnest, writing as if to a younger man. She could not stop from making mistakes. Evelyn had written with the intention of shaping a life. Clara had read that intention and clung to it like a torch. Now Adrian the torch had been guiding a risky man. The room narrowed to one honest need. Clarity read another passage. Adrian. His voice had no command in it, only a practical request. Clara pulled a different envelope free, biting the inside of her cheek as she slit the flap with a thumb. Her hand trembled, not with abstract dread but the mechanical need to keep letters legible and intact. She read a paragraph that described an argument in a small kitchen, an exchange of money that didn't match the receipts. Evelyn had written the date, the clock, the look on a man's mouth when he lied. The specificity made it a document. It made the claim harder to dismiss. Footsteps clattered on the stair the way a new fact clatters into a debate. The courier called up, voice lower now. We go together. You hand it over at the alley and no one dies. He tried to make the choice sound practical. Clara could feel the edge of the rooftop under her heel and the way that decisions had to be made in inches. She felt another shift inside her. Fear turned into resolve, then into a cold calculation. The letters were not just words. They were instructions written by someone who had thought out consequences. Evelyn had set a plan in ink. Clara, who had never wanted to act on anyone's story but her own, found herself moving into the role Evelyn had left for a reader. The writer. The rooftops snapped when a second figure appeared at the service door, a man on a chain of habit and authority. He was not a courier, not Marco, not Adrian. He was someone who smelled of city rules and paper. He called out, Mr. Moretti, this is messy. You cannot be seen moving those documents tonight. His voice carried a legal caution that sounded dissonant with the sour breath of gasoline. Adrian named him Luciano. The man had presence by habit, a ledger kept under his arm, a tired cuff, a need for process. Luciano's arrival was an external event that changed their options. The letters could be handled according to law, or they could be handed to those who made law blurry. The courier below cursed. He had not counted on an arbitration. Adrian's eyes narrowed. He could have handed the letters to Luciano. He could have let the night's awkward leverage go into lawyers' hands. Instead, he took a step closer to Clara and said, "We will not hand them to a stranger tonight." Marco closed the stare. Marco obeyed. Adrian's decision made the conflict smaller and sharper. He was not surrendering the letters to the city's process. He was choosing a private reckoning. They argued, then, in short clauses. "Marco, we let them go and we lose leverage," Adrian answered. "We hold and we risk escalation." "Luciano, legal custody is cleaner." The courier below laughed through his radio. Clara felt herself pulled into an argument that required her name in the sentences. People kept saying her name as if she were a hinge. "Clara, Luciano," voice softer. "You don't have to decide alone." His offer was not a rescue so much as displacement. He offered paperwork. Clara looked at the bundle, at the pressed flower Evelyn had tucked in the topmost envelope, and felt something inside her tilt. Another emotion shift arrived, from calculation to protectiveness. She imagined what Evelyn had intended, safety, not public spectacle, and she did not want Evelyn's handwriting turned into a weapon for parties she did not know. She made a quick choice. Clara took out the pen she kept in her satchel and, with hands steadier now than they had been at the first shout, signed a single line on the back of the top envelope, a note of provenance, her name and the place. She did not write legalese. She wrote a record that tethered the letters to her stewardship. Then she looked at Adrian. "You promised nothing before you read them," she said. "Don't promise me anything now. Take them, keep them locked, or let them be destroyed. But don't let them be used to hurt someone without a clear reason." Her words were precise. She knew that telling Adrian what to do would be pointless. Telling him the limit she expected was not. This was how she made her agency visible, through boundaries and the deliberate marking of ownership. Adrian's mouth moved like a man weighing coin. He could have argued. Instead, he took a breath and said, "I will put them somewhere secure until I've read them all. I will not release them without your consent." He the last two words slowly, like a man measuring thin ice. Clara felt caution surface where earlier there had been fear. She believed him in the way someone believes a measured choice made under pressure. Not absolute, but reliable enough for now. They heard boots on the stair. Someone else was coming up faster than the courier's radio suggested. For a moment everyone froze. Adrian, Marco, Luciano, Clara. The courier below cursed and started the motorcycle's engine as if ready to take a road that would either end the night or start a chase. It was a mini cliffhanger that tightened the scene. Who would appear next and which side would they choose? Clara's hands went cold against the twine. She could feel a small tremor run through her fingers. The man who arrived at the service door was not a stranger. It was Paolo Mancini's name in flesh. A courier from last month's trading, someone with Paolo's business on his jacket. He climbed up with the tired confidence of someone who thought himself entitled to negotiation. He did not look at Clara first. He looked at Adrian. "You have my name on those pages," he said. Not a question, but a demand. Adrian's face didn't change. "Sit down," he told Paolo. "Sit and tell me what you know." The instruction was a real order, the kind that rearranged a dangerous person into a conversational posture. Paolo sat on the rooftop, slipped like a small animal put in a cage, and began to talk in a string of defensive measures. He blamed middlemen, lost records, a broker who had gone missing. He insisted he had never sold the names. He offered small facts, who called whom, when the invoices were moved, and those facts shifted the room's understanding. Clara listened. She felt a new emotion rise, suspicion directed into inquiry. She Paolo a single thing. "Who handed you the receipts?" He named a man she recognized by description only, a man Adrian noted and cursed at under his breath. The name matched an accusation in an envelope Clara had not yet read. The twist was concrete and sharp. Paolo was implicated, but he also pointed to someone else. The letters had identified a betrayal. Paolo's testimony suggested that the betrayal had channels, not a single author. That revelation changed the scale of their choices. If Paolo was a small link, removing him would not end the chain. If the real betrayal came from within Adrian's trusted circle, then the letters were a map rather than a hammer. Adrian looked at Clara with an angle of request. He was asking her to continue reading, to keep providing the literal evidence Evelyn had left. Clara understood then that Evelyn had written to guide more than one person. She had written to create a chain of actions that would either remove the rot or rearrange loyalty. Clara read another page. Evelyn described a kitchen table, a cup with a chip on the rim, and the sound of paper sliding into a coat pocket. The detail was precise enough to be verifiable. Clara felt the letters transform from accusation to an instruction set she could follow. Fear receded into method. She no longer read for shock. She scanned for reference points she could compare to Adrian's memory. When they reached the scuffle, it happened fast because someone misread intent. Marco moved to intercept a hand reaching for the bundle. Paulo flinched, a small bend of his body that made the courier below think the rooftop had become a battle. A man lunged from the parapet with claws meant for twine. Marco reacted with a sweep that knocked the man back but sent the tied bundle over the rooftop's edge toward the alley below. For a breath, Clara saw the papers slip and then caught them with a sudden step. Her knees burned. Her palms scraped twine raw. The fall of the bundle would have ended them differently. Marco cursed and swore at the man who had lunged. The rooftop became loud. Radios, boots, breath, the river. Adrian moved, fast and measured, and closed around Clara as she rose with the papers. Hands grabbed at him. He shoved one away. The roof smelled now of sweat and gasoline and the metal of the parapet. Clara tasted copper on her tongue from the scrape of effort. Then came the choice that would decide what the letters would do next. The hired man who had lunged for the papers was subdued, but his words were weapons. "I will sell them to the tabloids," he said. "I'll get twice what you offer if I run to print." That threat was a practical one. Clara looked at Adrian. He looked back at her. The final tension of the night compressed into a single, brutal question. Hand them to him and risk public ruin, or destroy the leverage now and protect private people whose lives would be altered by exposure. Clara acted with the same quiet force she had used when she first unrolled the satchel that night in her kitchen. She undid the twine with deliberate fingers and, after a second's hesitation, she pulled out the top envelope and tore its pages into small strips. She handed those strips to Marco. "Destroy them," she said. "Burn or shred them. Not sold, not blackmailed." Her decision was a razor-edged compromise. She would not let Evelyn's words be weaponized for anonymous profit. Adrian watched every torn piece go out of sight. He did not stop her. He did not smile. He did not ask for the whole thing to be saved. Instead, he took the remaining envelopes and tucked them under his arm, as if he could shield paper the way he had once attempted to shield men. Paulo's shoulders lowered as if relieved, or as if he had shifted a burden. They left the rooftop in a hush of movement. Marco led the subdued man down a fire escape while Adrian and Clara slipped along the narrow metal stairs. The mail bundle, reduced, altered, and partially destroyed, rested against Adrian's chest. Clara's hands smelled of rough paper and ash. She was breathing in a new rhythm. Adrenaline relaxed into the slow beat of wounds stitched. On the fire escape, they paused to press bandages to shallow cuts and to check bruises. Adrian's hands were careful when he leaned across Clara to tie a strip of cloth over the scrape on her palm. He did not speak about ownership anymore. His voice had the small tenderness of someone who has learned to hold a new thing without a claim. "You could have walked away with nothing," he said. "You could have left them in the alley." His words were not praise. They were observation. Clara felt a warmth she had not been prepared to name. They moved down to a narrow kitchen in the early morning, where the city light was thinner and more honest. The room smelled of coffee and old wood. Clara placed the remaining tied bundle on the table. The pressed flower lay on top like a delicate, culpable thing. Dawn filtered through the curtains in amber slats. She felt, for the first time in the night, an ache that was not fear, an aftertaste of exhaustion and a new, careful courage. Adrian sat opposite and slid his hands under the envelopes. He set them in a stack, careful, not claiming them by right but by care. Evelyn wrote because she wanted to shape decisions. I will read them and follow what she asked of me. I will not burn them. I will not sell them. I will act on what is true. He did not promise how. He simply set an intention that required work. Clara reached into her satchel and took out the brass locket she rarely opened. Inside was a lock of hair and the scent of rain. She pressed the flower onto the bundle and tied a small strip of cloth around it. The action was not metaphorical. It was a measured act of custody. She closed the twine and looked at Adrian. I will not be an instrument of revenge, she said. I will not be a scapegoat or a martyr. If these letters must change someone, they will do it with evidence, not whispers. Her voice was steady. She had chosen to limit the letters' power by turning them from leverage into verified testimony. She had chosen boundaries instead of spectacle. Adrian nodded, slow and grateful for the clarity she brought. He reached for the bundle and, after a moment's hesitation, he slid it into a locked metal box he kept under his coat. He set the box on the table and put the key on a small chain. Then he pushed the key toward Clara. Trust is not given lightly, he said. I will not take your choice away. Keep the key tonight. His hand on the key was careful. Clara felt the weight of it like a promise with conditions. She did not accept blindly. She accepted with the requirement that they follow a process. She would read, she would compare, she would verify. She would not let names be flung into night. Morning light revealed small new facts. Marco's bruise, Paolo's tired composure, the press of the river against the quay. Evelyn's handwriting sat in a stack, patient and exact. Clara sat with Adrian and Luciano at the kitchen table. They made a plan. Adrian would confirm facts. Luciano would run a quiet verification through legal channels. And Clara would transcribe the letters into a secure file stored with a lawyer who would open it if evidence was presented and the public interest required. The plan was a string of practical actions rather than rhetoric. It contained steps, not speeches. Before the meeting dissolved into routine, Clara one last question. Why did Evelyn write to him? Adrian answered with a detail so small Clara almost missed it. She wanted him to choose people who would not betray him. She wanted him to see the ledger that might make him kinder or harder. She feared both. The admission was a light that did not make the past less painful, but made her life clearer. Evelyn had tried to steer a man who feared being shaped. Now Clara understood that the letters were both a confession and a careful attempt at repair. They agreed on a concrete first action. Adrian would confront the man Luciano had named. Not in accusation, but with evidence. They would ask for explanation. Paolo would be given time to show invoices and receipts. If those checks failed, Adrian promised to remove him from positions of authority. If they held, they would leave him and the letters alone. The choice required slow, visible steps. Clara felt a final shift, one that was small and precise, from survivor to steward. She did not feel transformed by slogans. She felt the muscles in her hands steadier, the sharpness in her attention retooled into a practical habit. Evelyn's letters had reached a reader who could do only one right thing: make the past legible and the future cautious. When the kitchen door opened, Adrian pushed the locked box toward Clara. He stood and, without a flourish, gave her a new instruction that functioned like a boundary. You keep the key. I will not open the box without you, and I will not act on these letters without checking everything they claim. He left the room with Marco and Paolo to begin the slow work. They moved like men resuming duty. Alone at the table, Clara slid the pressed flower from the top envelope and smoothed it against the paper with a fingertip. She set the flower atop the tied bundle and tied a new strand of twine around the packet. The physical act of placing the flower and binding the letters was simple, a chain of muscles and choice. She closed the box and turned the key between her fingers once. Her pulse was steady. The morning light made the paper look honest. She could have handed the key back, could have asked Adrian to resign control. Instead she kept it. She had decided what Evelyn had not forced her to choose. To be a careful steward, not an instrument of spectacle. The decision was concrete. She stood, put the key in her pocket, and walked to the window where the river reflected the city's pale face. Adrian and his men moved outside. The world would go on with its quiet bargains. A knock came at the kitchen door, 2 light raps that sounded like the next practical event arriving. Clara opened it to find a courier with a thin envelope and a name she recognized. Luciano's assistant with confirmation of receipts. The action required more choices, but it arrived as a practical matter and not as a melodrama. Clara registered it, set the new envelope beside the locked box, and closed the kitchen door with the sound of another small decision made. The day had begun. The letters were not gone, but they were not free to be used as hammers anymore. Clara placed her hand in her pocket around the key and felt the solid metal there. Ownership, custody, and the work to come.